Max?
Sorry?
Do you want me to raise that?
Sure, go for it.
Awesome.
Then
Two
you can
things to just
also-
double check before we continue, just before we
Max?
officially start.
Sorry?
Do you want me to raise that?
Sure, go for it.
Awesome.
Whoops. Then
Two
you can
things
also-
to just double check before we continue, just before we officially start.
Sorry?
It's
Do you want me
weird
to raise
that
that?
this just
Sure,
happened.
go
Hold
for it.
on 1 second. Not sure why.
Okay. Okay.
Awesome. So I figured out that problem and turning that off now. Just wanted to make sure that everyone here is okay with going live on our YouTube channel during this, of course, and with the recording being saved for future use. But as long as everyone's good, we'll go ahead and pull up the slides, and I'll let everyone into the room, and I'll mute all users. I'll kick us off. I'll spotlight the 4 of us actually right away. And then, or the 5 of us rather, and then we will get started. Well, I'll actually just spotlight myself and Rachel for now, and then I'll spotlight our 3 panelists as we get going. All right, so slideshow's ready. Excellent. Hello and welcome to UAM, our webinar today on Global Health Grades Canada, our new Global Health Report Card just released earlier this week. We're excited to have everyone join us here live. We're also live streaming on YouTube on our YouTube platform, which is UAM as the name of the account, UAM on youtube.com. We're excited to have everyone here to join us. I'm Justin Mendoza, Executive Director for UAM North America. And for folks who don't know us, who are joining us for the first time, we are the student movement of the Access to Medicines movement, the folks who are working diligently to make sure that medicines are affordable and accessible around the world, and to make sure that our biomedical research meets the needs that are happening, that are really needed across the globe. Our report card we'll dive into. I'll let our team talk about that and describe what's going on and the real impacts there. But really, our report card is one way to assess how universities are acting in the access to medicine space and how much they are focused on solving the issues that do face us in global health equity. The report card really gives us a chance to point out where we're doing well and where we're failing as a university network, and where our alumni and our students can really work to try to change the access to medicines landscape going forward. So our work really dives into 3 pillars. One on access to medicines. You've heard me say access, I think 6 times in these opening remarks, but access to medicines, where we focus on the end cost of the medicines developed on our campuses to make sure that they're actually affordable for people in a variety of settings and to make sure that they exist altogether. Innovation, where we try to address the world's equity needs, where we try to address diseases like neglected tropical diseases or even antimicrobial resistance, where research doesn't happen today because the incentives are not correct in the intellectual property and research and development systems. And empowerment, the thought and process that students can have a voice and change the way that universities and the overall system of biomedical research works. But without further ado, I'm just here to say hello and to introduce folks, but I would like to introduce one of our wonderful advisory council members and bring you through our agenda. So today we'll hear first from Rachel Kittle-Monroe, and I'll introduce her in full in 1 second. And then you'll hear about the report card the overview, the background, methodology, results, and what you can actually do on your own campuses or as an alumnus across Canada. And then we'll also hear at the very end from Varun Mathur, who was the author of the first UAEM Canada report card in 2017 and is now on our board of directors. And he'll talk a little bit about the impact here as well. So I will, without further ado, hand it over to Rachel, who is, as you can see here, the founder and executive director of Sea Change Initiative in Canada, is a board member of Doctors Without Borders, is a professor at McGill University, one of the universities graded in our report card, and beyond all of that has been a long-time advisory council member and former president of UAEM North America and a longtime friend. I'm very excited to have Rachel here, and I will take down the screen share so you can hear from her directly without a distracting PowerPoint.
Thanks so much, Justin, for the introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy to have been invited to give this introduction to this 2023 edition of the UAEM Canada U15 report card. I joined actually UAEM in 2007. Really at the beginning of the UAEM life. I was the founding president along with Ethan Gillen, who was the then executive director. And the report card was one of the big initiatives of our second executive director back in 2012 when he first came up with this idea of a report card. So I'm thrilled to see this initiative carrying on. I think it's absolutely critical that we hold our universities accountable to their commitments on global access for medicines. So I'm really proud of the work that these McGill students have done. It's a big job, it's a lot of work, a lot of insistence, a lot of no responses, and then also a lot of reactions when this report card comes out. So first of all, thank you to them. We're all going to be speaking later, Celine and Amanda. We'll be talking together with Max about the details of the report card after I've spoken. So I wanted to make three key points today. First of all, I wanted to stress the importance of COVID-19, which has revealed for all of us to see that the current drug system does not provide equitable access to medicines. We've known that for years and years. Access to medicines activists have been working on this issue for decades, but if we didn't understand it before, we should understand it today. The second point I want to make is that we need innovation and access for new treatments and modes of delivery. We have so many gaps in the system and so many needs inside the system, and we need new innovation and we need increased access. And the third point is that universities have a critical role to play, given their contribution to drug development, often contributions which are often not recognized or talked about. So on my first point, that COVID-19 revealed that the current drug system doesn't provide equitable access to medicines, we need to address the system which is clearly failing patients globally. We need a system that's designed with equity and inclusion at its heart. At UAEM, we've never agreed that innovation can only happen through traditional routes of intellectual property and drug discovery, where pharmaceutical companies hold the vast monopoly on the product and charge whatever they like to people who, at the end of the day, will pay whatever they have to pay to keep their loved ones alive. In 2016, we produced something called the Alt-Reroute Report, which tried to look at all the different alternative ways of drug development that there were around. And we found more than 81 approaches around the world that created research and development pathways that put people and global needs above profit as the key motivator for access. And that was a really clear demonstration that outside of the traditional system, there is a lot happening that we need to be able to elevate and use. What we've also seen is that there have been initiatives in response to the pandemic that are just starting to blossom around the world and will ramp up manufacturing capacity at the local level. And that has all been despite the failure of those national powers to share technical knowledge and IP related to the vaccine for COVID-19. It's our view in UAM that part of this change depends on our top research institutions creating the language, the circumstances, and the education that future researchers need to believe in an alternative view of the future. And that's why we assess the education of students in our Global Health Report Card. My second point is that the vital importance of access issues is very alive, especially around the innovation of vaccines and drugs for new and old diseases. We also, when we think about those access issues, we need to think about novel and affordable medicines, mechanisms of delivery. Or maybe what do we actually need to do is simply rediscover what was already there. I wanted to give you an example that Justin was reminding me about today, is the story of Xtandi, which was a late-stage prostate cancer drug that was developed and received at UCLA and received FDA approval in 2012. In 2020, it was uncovered that the university was defending the manufacturer of the drug, Pfizer, Astellas, in India to ensure that the drug's patents were held, so denying generic competition in LMIC's lower and middle income countries. At the time, the drug was selling for more than $125,000 US in the US market and around $4,400 per patient per year in India. And let's remember the average annual salary in India is barely higher than $4,800. When we heard about that, the UAM students demanded that the university drop its global case and demanded that the US government march in or step in to make Xtandi affordable, and also demanding that the UCLA change its policies. And the campaign worked. Those students who fought hard for 2 years got UCLA to change its policy, and it now has a new policy on affordable access, which calls for the licensees to make sure that the products of university research are affordable to people who need them most. So it just shows this power of this activism that we have, that we can really change policy. So apart from things like that with drugs that have already existed for a while, there are a lot of new options that are coming online. People are talking about psychedelics. People are talking about other plant medicines. We need to start being open to this traditional knowledge. Just here at McGill on March the 30th at McGill's Bravo Gala, which is an event that honors McGill researchers and scholars, there was a keynote from our venerable professor, Cindy Blackstock, an Indigenous leader who is the winner of the Shirk Impact Award Gold Medal. And in her 7-minute speech, she said, "We now face the challenge in academia of discovering what was already there." What she was referring to was Indigenous knowledge, and learning and focusing on Indigenous communities is absolutely critical to an institution like McGill and universities all around the world, especially within the history of Canada. It seems to me particularly critical. And UAM discovered through these processes of surveys with universities that only 0.25% of all research done at the top 15 research institutions in Canada even touches Indigenous health. That's incredible. The third point I wanted to make is that universities have a critical role to play, given their very, very strong contributions to drug development. There's not very many very recent figures on this, and there's still a big area for research. For any of you researchers who would like to put your minds to doing this, it's really important we have these figures. But what we do know is that from 2010 to 2016, 100%, a full 100% of all medicines that were approved by the US Food and Drug Administration did include public funding, and a majority of the publicly funded research happened on a university campus. Now, you can't get much more clear about the importance of the role of universities than that, and not only the role of universities, but the responsibility of universities. And COVID-19 vaccines are a really clear case in point. Universities and public funding were critical to the development of all the COVID-19 vaccines. both Harvard and the University of Texas had researchers who reported in 2022 that despite the ownership of patents on most COVID vaccines lying in the hands of private companies, US taxpayers funded the fundamental innovations that made the mRNA vaccines possible. In total, in fact, over $18 billion of US public funds were invested in 6 vaccine candidates. Of course, there'd been decades of government funding for research prior to the pandemic in some of the solutions that were found, but the US taxpayers also added significantly more support during the pandemic to further accelerate the vaccine development. And for the Moderna vaccine, to get it from bench to bedside, nearly $6 billion came from the US public funds. So this is only in the US context. This all comes from an article that was written by these researchers at Harvard and University of Texas. But there's, of course, been billions of dollars invested in Canada and many other countries around the world. So given this central role of universities, these report cards that we've created really seek to analyze how universities are actually performing in the US and Canada. How much are they taking on their role and their responsibility in ensuring equitable access to medicines? So as I mentioned earlier, this first report card was done in 2013, and we graded universities across the US and Canada. There were 54 universities at the time, monitoring those 3 elements that Justin raised at the beginning: access, innovation, and empowerment, and seeing how those initiatives were playing out in the universities. A second report card was done in 2015, where we decided to separate out the US universities from the Canadian universities because it was considered that it was not fair to compare US and Canadian universities together. So we did a report card on the 60 US universities. And then in 2017, we had the first All Canada report card, which we've got Varun Mathur on the call, and he was absolutely the inspiration and leader of that process. And that assessed the 15 major research universities in Canada. And so today in 2023, we have this second university, U15 it's called. So I keep thinking of under 15 football teams when I see U15, but it's a 15 top research and medical institutions in Canada. And the average grade that's been given in this report card is a D, which is not a great grade. It is higher, I will say, than the average US grade in 2020, which was a D minus. But what it seems is that despite some developments like publishing COVID-19 publications open source during the pandemic, universities are still falling very far behind on their commitment to the public good. I did want to just quote, because he's a great friend of mine and I think an absolute model for UAEM students for over 15 years, from Stephen Lewis, who is the co-director of AIDS-Free World and Canada's former ambassador to the United Nations. And he said, Canadian universities play a critical role in addressing global challenges such as HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, and other neglected diseases. It's imperative that we continue to give priority to the lives of millions through licensing practices that allow our world-class research to reach out to those who need it most. The report card helps us to measure the impact for our universities and the impact they have on global health. It clearly shows Canadian universities are falling short. Students, faculties, and related communities must jolt the universities into sanity. So our own institution, McGill, got a D+, and this was down from a B+ in 2017. And I've pulled out with the students 4 key areas for improvement. First, McGill needs to do more non-exclusive licensing. So even though McGill ranked with the 3rd highest grade in this edition of the report card, and even though McGill introduced a global access license to great fanfare in 2019, McGill reports only 5% of all of its licenses on health technology being non-exclusive. When you compare this with UBC, which got a grade B in this year's report card, they had 83% of their licenses as non-exclusive. The second key area is to do less patenting in lower and middle income countries. Even with the global access license framework in effect, McGill still patented 71% of their health products in lower and middle income countries. By comparison, UBC patented less than 10% in lower middle income countries. The third key area for improvement is that we need more research on Indigenous health. None of McGill's publications in the survey period, which was January 2019 to December 31st, 2020, were on Indigenous health, and that shows a clear gap on research focus and priority. And then the fourth area for improvement is McGill's accountability. In its global access license framework from 2019, it committed to an annual accountability report. We haven't yet seen a single report. So I'm going to end by saying that we can and should all strive for our institutions to do better, to build a more equitable world, and to deliver on our commitments to serve the public good. Cindy Blackstock also said in her speech, "It's no longer enough to write a report. We must involve ourselves in the implementation of solutions." McGill is ready to do that. The question to McGill is, are you? So I'm going to hand over now to the team, amazing team of McGill students, Max Crosby, Amanda Lulu, and Celine Huang, who are here to talk about the report and its findings in more detail. Thank you.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Max Crosby, and I have been working on the Canadian report cards since my freshman year, 3 years ago, back in 2020. And I was part of the making of this report card methodology, data collection, website creation, the white paper writing, so like all of it. And I'm very, very excited to present our findings with all of you today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda. I have been working on this report card now for a bit over a year. I joined as an intern last summer during the data collection process. And after the data collection process, I've primarily been focusing on the outreach part of the report card. So basically contacting a lot of people, making sure our report card got out there and got as many people to be aware of what it is we're doing and getting traction on it. So yeah. And I'm very excited to present our results for the people here today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Celine. I first joined the report card process a little over, actually, January of last year, also during the data collection with Max and Amanda. And my focus on the report card has primarily been around writing the white paper, which you can find detailing all of our findings in a more thorough manner. And today I'm going to start us off by taking you through some background of the report card and why we think it's really necessary. So access to medicines, as we all know, is a fundamental part of the basic universal human right to health. But despite this, a lack of equitable access to medicine still massively persists across the world and in Canada. And it's still a huge problem for billions of people every single day. Globally, there are nearly 2 billion people worldwide who still don't have access to essential medicines. And in Canada, despite an existing universal government healthcare insurance, outpatient prescription medicines and a lot of essential medicines are still provided through a patchwork combination of public and private healthcare drug plans, which leaves many individuals to bear the financial burden of paying for these medicines themselves. A Statistics Canada report from 2019 reports that 20% of Canadians are uninsured or underinsured and pay for most of their prescription medicines still out of pocket. And in 2016, 1 million Canadians reported having to choose between essential necessities such as purchasing food and heat over a needed prescription. Canadian drug prices are among the highest in the world still, second only to the United States. So evidently, there's a huge problem with how accessible life-saving medicines and health technologies are, both globally and in Canada. And there's also overlap between these two domains, the global and the Canadian spaces, which means that Canadian research policy has an effect on medicine accessibility across the world. A 2013 study analyzed 6 separate cases of Canadian policy disputes where improved access to medicines in developing countries was in conflict with intellectual property rights. It found that in all except one case, Canada repeatedly prioritized intellectual property rights over access, which is a pattern that's also evident in several domestic cases. And this really shows that the Canadian research system has a pattern of actively prioritizing profit and exclusivity over improving equitable access. So the question that follows from all of this is, how can we address the systemic issue of drug and health technology access? And to answer this question, we have to take a closer look at how research is conducted and how medicines and health technologies are developed and brought to market in Canada. So the Canadian report card focuses on university contributions to Canadian biomedical research. And this is for a few different reasons. One of which is that higher education leads Canada's national research and innovation system. In 2017, higher education was responsible for 41.25% of Canada's gross domestic expenditure for research and development, with natural sciences research accounting for over 75% of that figure. And this is especially significant when we compare it to other OECD nations. The OECD average and the US proportion from around that same time is approximately 13%. So here we can see that universities are extremely important to focus on when we're talking about these systemic issues with Canadian research and development within the Canadian context. And further, the U15, which is the collective of Canada's 15 most prominent research universities that our report card focuses on, report that they altogether could conduct approximately $8.5 billion of research annually, comprising about 79% of all competitively allocated research funding in Canada. So because of their significant contributions to Canada's national research system and output, these institutions are uniquely positioned to influence the accessibility of the health technologies that they research, develop, and then later license. And another reason why we've chosen to focus on these universities and why they're so uniquely positioned to contribute to this problem is that is because of their position in the drug development pipeline in Canada. So we're going to take, say we're developing a hypothetical drug. We're going to name it CanRep for Canadian Report Card, just to keep it on theme. So when this drug makes it to market, it starts through funding. So universities receive public funding from federal organizations such as the CIHR or the Canadian Institutes for Health Research. To give you a sense of the numbers that we're talking about here, research and development spending reached a record high in 2021 and the 2021 to 2022 calendar year. In this year, $15.9 billion went towards Canadian universities. And of this, $5.3 billion were sourced entirely from public sources, stemming from federal and provincial contributions to university R&D. So this funding is used in university labs to research and develop CanRep, which allows the universities to own the intellectual property rights for medicines and control the patents for these health technologies, meaning that universities have the power to decide and restrict who is able to use and manufacture the products of their research. The next step for CanRep's journey to market is licensing, which involves an agreement between the patent owner, which is in this case the universities, and a licensee, which is often a private company, which allows the licensee to use the patented research to produce the technology for market. Often without explicit policy stating otherwise on the part of the university, this arrangement gives the licensee sole control over the production of the technology, allowing to price it however they wish. And this entire process of licensing is mediated by the university's Technology Transfer Office, or TTO, which is a term you'll likely hear a lot more during the course of this webinar. So these sources are primarily a source of revenue for universities through private sector collaboration, and they allow these private companies to commercialize the health technologies. So finally, the drug is submitted to Health Canada and relevant authorities for review and approval. And then it's manufactured and sold for a price, again, that's really decided by the manufacturing companies as allowed by the licensing agreement. So throughout this whole journey, we can see that one of the most important steps in the process, which determines how accessible a drug will be, is the licensing process. This is a pivotal moment for drug access, as universities have the ability to allow for more affordable generic versions of technologies to be produced and sold for lower prices across the world. However, there's still little transparency and available information regarding just how equitable universities' licensing policies actually are. And also there's limited information about other aspects that can promote access, such as global health education offerings, clinical trials transparency, and many other factors that you'll hear more about later. So this is where the 2023 Canadian University Report Card comes in. This report is a comprehensive evaluation of U15 university policies in relation to the accessibility and equity of their biomedical research and development. Through the report card, we intend to hold universities accountable and responsible for their significant influence over Canadian biomedical research. As such significant stakeholders and contributors to Canada's research output, and with their influential position in the drug development pipeline and reception of public funding, universities have a responsibility and massive potential to make a significant difference. So our goal is really to maximize the impact of the health technologies that universities develop. In exposing the current state of university R&D policies, the report card also serves as an advocacy tool, pinpointing specific and actionable areas of improvement for each university. And this allows us to advance concrete changes at these universities. And we know that change is possible. In addition to some of the examples that Rachel previously mentioned, in 2019, UAEM worked with McGill to get the university to adopt global access licensing principles. And even more recently, UAEM played a part in UC Berkeley releasing a new affordable access plan provision, ensuring health technologies discovered at Berkeley are accessible to those in the US and in lower and middle income countries. And to tell you more about how the report card aims to achieve all of these goals, Max is now going to take you through the methodology and organization of the project.
Awesome. Thank you, Celine, for that wonderful introduction and background into the 2023 Canadian Report Card. Over these next few minutes, I'll cover our report card methodology with particular emphasis on the topics we focused on in our report and our data collection process. Really, to start off, though, the whole concept of the university's biomedical research and drug development process is very, very complicated. For this reason, we developed a comprehensive methodology and broke down our report into 5 subsections: access, innovation, transparency, empowerment, and COVID-19. In the coming slides, I'll cover each of these 5 individual sections and the key subtopics within each section in great detail. At the start of our report card project, we developed questions that we wanted to ask for each of the 5 subsections to evaluate universities. Some of these questions were new questions made for the 2023 report card specifically, and the rest came from past US and Canadian report cards and were adapted for current times and the change of countries. When restarting the Canadian report card, we really prioritized having a rigorous and standardized grading methodology to evaluate universities. Particularly, we wanted to maintain reproducibility and integrity of our results. To do this, we created a methodology that defined and covered data collection and scoring for each question in our report in detail. For each question, we first evaluated whether or not we could actually answer the question with publicly available data. In cases where no database could be accessed by students, university data could be beneficial, we decided to survey universities to collect data for those questions. Once we established a data collection protocol, we began to focus on how to score each question. This involved us defining what actions a university could take that could be defined as exemplary in promoting access to medicines worldwide, as well as defining actions that could be considered sufficient or lackluster. The characterization of these actions involved evaluation of leading universities and organizations and their own contributions to access to medicines. Now, I'm going to give a brief rundown of the 5 sections of the 2023 Canadian Report Card and talk about their spirit and key subtopics within each. Starting with the Access section, when the Canadian Report Card team came together and began building out this section, we wanted to evaluate to what extent universities were increasing the access of their research, and we wanted to determine the measures universities had in place to improve accessibility to university-developed medicines. Given the founding principles of the U15 universities to mobilize knowledge for all Canadians and to ensure a just future for all, we really expected universities to believe in sharing research results and to practice licensing their medicines in a socially responsible manner. To examine if universities were doing this, we identified 4 key measurable subtopics: open access, licensing agreements, drug licensing, and contributions to the medicines patent pool. I'll explain all of these 4 categories in brief. While universities publish a fantastic number of innovative papers each year, the accessibility of these publications tends to be very variable. Historically, university research papers have been expensive to access, with most highly cited papers lying behind paywalls. This limits access to university research to unaffiliated scientists and reduces collaboration in research. Open access publications present as a good solution to this, wherein researchers can pay for journals a one-time fee to publish the research in an open access format. In this format, papers are free to access, regardless of affiliation or ability to pay for accessing articles. Next, licensing agreements present as a direct way for universities to improve access to medicines in Canada and worldwide, through outlining principles to follow when licensing technologies to pharmaceutical companies. These principles can promote generic production of university-developed medicines or detail how universities will ensure access to drugs they produce in Canada and worldwide. Given the success of recent licensing agreements, like the Open COVID Pledge, we wanted to see if universities believed in signing on to licensing agreements and to gauge the strength of licensing agreements that each university had signed on to. In a similar vein, the Access section also sought out to look at how universities were licensing their medicines overall, with a specific focus on the provisions universities were using to restrict drug access to communities in Canada and worldwide. Finally, the Access section looked at how universities were contributing to the medicines patent pool, a really innovative intellectual property sharing body aimed at increasing the availability of essential medicines in low-income countries. This body has shown fantastic success initially, with the intellectual property sharing through the medicines patent pool leading to 148 countries receiving new generic drugs and for 27 billion doses of medicines being administered worldwide. The report card Access section asks universities how and if they contributed to this patent pool. Moving on to the second report card section, the innovation section, we designed this section to evaluate if universities were actively researching global health. This involved investigating the strength of global health research programs at the Canadian U15 universities. Our first 2 subtopics, research funding and publications, looked to see if universities were winning and using funding to research key areas in global health, such as neglected tropical diseases. They additionally looked to determine the output of global health programs at the U15 in the form of publications. Our third subtopic, institutions, looked for the presence of long-standing dedicated research institutes at Canadian universities aimed at global health. These institutes are critical to ensure strong commitments from universities towards improving global health through the existence of dedicated staff and funding going towards global health research. Next, our empowerment section looked at what universities did towards educating students about current and emerging issues in global health. Firstly, this section evaluated the existing departments, majors, minors, and concentrations at each U15 university for global health. On a similar note, the empowerment section examined the existing body of global health-related coursework at the U15 and determined if these courses were required for students to take as a part of their major or minor programs. This element at the empowerment section additionally took a look at specific classes offered to teach students about current issues in global health, such as those regarding decolonizing global health. Lastly, on a more academic note, the empowerment section looked into whether or not universities held conferences or research symposiums about specific issues in global health. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we decided to include virtual events in this. Next, our fourth section was the transparency section. which looked at how open universities made their research to the public. The first and perhaps most important element of this section was examining how universities conducted their clinical trials. Clinical trials are a specific type of university research, wherein the efficacy and safety of new medicines are tested out in humans. These trials are essential for patients and healthcare professionals to know the safety and limitations of new medicines. And both of these groups require a strong knowledge base on these factors to make educated decisions on treatment plans. In recent times, a lot of attention has been placed onto the way clinical trials have been conducted due to the large amount of clinical trials that are completed but never actually have the results published. This issue has been acknowledged by both the CIHR in Canada and the World Health Organization on a more global scale, with both of these bodies producing new frameworks in the past few years and guidelines on how clinical trials are to be conducted and reported. The transparency section looked to see whether or not Canadian universities publish their research results in a responsible manner and examined the policies universities adopted regarding clinical trials. Particular attention was paid to whether or not universities mandated the publishing of clinical trial results as well. Beyond clinical trials, the transparency section looked to see if universities engaged in commissioned research from pharmaceutical companies and to see if universities partnered with pharmaceutical companies allowed these companies to block the publication of research results. Lastly, the section awarded points to universities who actually responded to the UAM surveys. In our fifth and final section, the COVID-19 section, we examined how universities responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. This section held a particular focus on university decisions that improved knowledge transfer during the pandemic and allowed for collaboration and research, two elements noted for their necessity in pandemic responses. The first subtopic in this section looked at whether or not universities agreed to licensing agreements or guidelines that allowed for the sharing of university patented COVID-19 health technologies. This sharing could allow for affordable generics to be produced for university research medicines. Next, the COVID-19 section examined the proportion of publications regarding COVID-19 that were published in open access format, a significant early issue during the pandemic that was noted with numerous calls and petitions made for COVID-19 research to be freely accessible for all. Lastly, the COVID-19 section evaluated whether or not universities were leaders in COVID-19 research, specifically through hosting academic conferences to foster collaboration in COVID-19 research. Okay, that was a lot about our 5 sections before, but to go back into the data collection, given the breadth of the topics in our report card and overall expansiveness in our project, it was essential to have a strong methodology to ensure quality results. This included using a defined methodology to collect data for all 65 questions in the 5 sections of our report. To ensure standardization of our methodology, we utilize a systemized data collection process for all of our questions, which an example of which could be seen on the left of your screen. This included defining question weighting, possible scoring options for each question, as well as points associated with each scoring option, how to collect data for each question, including databases to be used, searches to be performed, timeframes over which searches to be performed, and information on how to perform necessary calculations. In cases where searches of databases were required, exact keyword strings with Boolean operators were provided to researchers for each question. Lastly, quality assurance strategies were added for questions to maximize the strength of our data. So in our report card research, we used 2 main streams of data for our report. The first of these streams was our preferred Category 1 data, which we collected ourselves using UAM researchers, like me, Amanda, and Celine. To ensure the integrity of this data, multiple investigators collected data for each question for each school. In the case of discrepancy in the data collected by our first 2 investigators, a third investigator would go in and collect data to resolve the discrepancy. And this sort of data collection was performed for all universities in the U15. For questions where data was not publicly